The loudest person in the room is almost never the smartest. I know, sounds like something a grumpy old man would say. And I am. But I also read a book by a fella named Matthew Pollard called The Introvert's Edge to Networking. And it confirmed what I've suspected my whole life. The quiet ones are playing a completely different game. And most of the time, they're winning. They just don't know it yet. Pollard's an introvert himself. Got told growing up he'd never amount to much. Ended up building 5 multi-million-dollar businesses before he was 30. The thing he figured out is that introverts don't need to become extroverts. They need their own system. That idea reminded me of a woman I want to tell you about. Her name was Nora Sato. Nora was 32. A forensic trace evidence analyst at a city crime lab. She sat in a cold room under fluorescent lights, hunched over a microscope, staring at things most people wouldn't notice if they stepped on them. Fibers, hair, soil, the invisible alphabet of a crime scene. She could pick a single thread from a victim's sleeve and tell you the manufacturer, the dye lot, and which store carried it. She once pinned the suspect's location from the pollen in his shoe treads. The detective just stared at her. How? Nora shrugged. It's just what the evidence says. That was Nora. She didn't perform. She let the evidence do the talking. The problem was, evidence can't talk. Every Monday morning, a man named Trent Holloway held court at the case briefing. Senior analyst, 41. Tall, loud, teeth so white they had their own lighting budget. He brought donuts on Fridays because he knew people remembered the guy who brought donuts. When Trent presented, he didn't read a report. He told a story. Big gestures, dramatic pauses. The detectives leaned in. Even the lab director smiled. When Nora presented, she stood at the front with her printout and read. Sample 14B showed a 60-40 polyester cotton blend with a reactive dye consistent with production lot 4417B. And that's about where she lost the room. Every time. She was thorough. She was precise. She was right. And she was invisible. Because here's the thing nobody tells you. Being right isn't enough. If nobody understands what you're saying or why it matters, you might as well be talking to your microscope. And Trent wasn't as smart as Nora, not even close. But he could walk into a room and make people feel like they were watching a movie, often using Nora's data. One Thursday in October, a case came in that changed everything. A young woman named Elena Medina, 24, found in Riverside Park. The evidence was thin. No DNA, no weapon, no witnesses. Trent ran the initial analysis and came back with nothing. Standard environmental transfer, he said. Nothing probative. But Nora asked for the victim's coat. Not because anyone assigned it, because she asked. She stayed late. She worked under the scope for 3 hours. And she found it. A microscopic fiber on the victim's right sleeve. Synthetic. Didn't match anything in the park, anything Elena owned, anything in the reference database. Nora cross-referenced industrial suppliers. She pulled chemical data from trade publications most people don't know exist. The fiber was from an industrial cleaning uniform, distributed to companies in 3 states. And one of those companies had a contract with the building where Elena worked. It was the kind of breakthrough that cracks a case open like an egg. Nora wrote it up. 12 pages. She emailed it to Trent so he could include it in the task force briefing the next morning. And the next morning, Nora sat in the back row and watched Trent present her discovery as if the idea had materialized from his own beautiful head. He paused for dramatic effect when he named the cleaning company. Someone whistled. The lead detective shook his hand. Great work, Holloway. Trent smiled. Just doing my job. Nora sat in the back row, jaw tight, screaming on the inside, but her face a locked door. She went back to her evidence room, closed the door, and for the first time in her career, she thought about quitting. But she didn't. Because that afternoon, there was a knock. Detective Alma Ruiz, 20 years on homicide. The kind of woman who'd seen everything twice and was surprised by nothing, except laziness. "That fiber analysis was yours, wasn't it?" she said. "How did you know?" asked Nora. "Because I read the real report, not the cartoon version Holloway gave us. Holloway doesn't know a reactive dye from a crayon." Nora said what she always said. "It's just what the evidence shows." Ruiz looked at her for a long moment. Then she said something that hit Nora harder than any case file ever had. "Sato, you've got to stop letting your work speak for itself. Because it can't talk. And the longer you stay quiet, the louder people like Holloway get." She left. The door clicked shut, and Nora sat there with those words echoing off the cold walls of her evidence room. Now, Pollard writes about exactly this in The Introvert's Edge. He says when introverts introduce themselves by their function, "I'm a lab analyst, I'm an accountant," people put them in a commodity box, interchangeable. Once you're in that box, it's almost impossible to climb out. Nora had been in that box her entire career, even though she was the best analyst in the building. After Ruiz left, something shifted. Nora started paying attention to why Trent's presentations worked. It wasn't that Trent was smarter. It was that Trent never led with the data. He led with the person. The data came second, embedded inside a narrative that made people lean forward. Pollard cites Stanford research showing people remember up to 22 times more information when it's embedded in a story than listed as facts. 22 times! Your brain literally synchronizes with the storytellers. That's why a good story in a courtroom can make a juror feel what the victim felt. Nora didn't know the neuroscience, but she started practicing. She began structuring her reports differently. Instead of leading with chemical analyses, she led with the person. Who was Elena Medina? Where did she walk? What did she touch? The evidence became the thread, not a spreadsheet, but a trail. She practiced alone after hours, walking through findings like she was telling a story to someone who cared. It felt ridiculous at first. She was a scientist, not a performer. But something was changing. 3 weeks later, the real test came. The Medina case was stalling. The DA's office was breathing down their necks. Ruiz walked into the lab director's office. "I want Sato presenting, not Holloway. She found the fiber. If we're building a case that holds up in court, the person presenting needs to be the person who actually understands the science." Nora got the call at 4 p.m. The briefing was at 9 a.m. She was terrified. She almost called in sick. She almost did what she'd always done: retreat to the back row and let someone else take the stage. But instead, she did something she'd never done before. She planned. Not just the content. She always planned the content. She planned the conversation. She scripted her opening. She practiced how she'd tell Elena's story through the evidence. Pollard says 90% of networking success happens outside the room. The preparation, the scripting, the practice. That's where introverts have the edge. Extroverts wing it. Introverts who prepare properly outperform them. Because when you know what you're going to say, you're free to actually listen. That night, Nora practiced 11 times. She timed it, she trimmed the jargon, she even practiced the pauses, the places where she'd stop talking and let the evidence land. The next morning, she did not sit in the back row. She stood at the front. Trent was in the second row, arms crossed, one eyebrow raised. And Nora began. She didn't start with sample numbers. She started with Elena. Elena Medina left work at 6:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. She walked to Riverside Park, the route she took every evening. She was wearing a gray wool coat her mother had given her for her birthday. The room was quiet. On the right sleeve of that coat, I found a fiber that didn't belong. Not to the park, not to her wardrobe. That fiber tells us someone who had no business touching Elena Medina made contact with her that night. She walked them through the sourcing chain, but she didn't present it as a chemical report. She presented it as the story of Elena's last night, told through the invisible evidence Elena left behind for someone careful enough to find it. When she finished, the room was silent for 3 full seconds. Then the lead detective said, "That's the clearest evidentiary presentation I've heard in 15 years." Trent uncrossed his arms. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. After the briefing, the DA's lead prosecutor stopped her. "Sato, when this goes to trial, I want you on the stand, not Holloway. You." The trial was 4 months later. Nora took the stand. The defense attorney tried to rattle her, threw jargon, challenged her methodology. A year ago, she'd have retreated into technical language and hoped the jury could follow. Instead, she told Elena's story. The keycard log, the walk through the park, the coat from her mother, the fiber on the sleeve. She let the evidence build like chapters of the book. When she described the fiber match, the invisible thread connecting the suspect to the victim, one juror leaned forward and put her hand over her mouth. The jury convicted in 4 hours. Afterwards, in the courthouse hallway, Elena's mother approached her. Red eyes, trembling hands. She stood in front of Nora and said, "You saw my daughter. Everyone else just saw evidence. You saw her." Nora didn't have words. She just held that woman's hands and nodded.
Now let me ask you something. Sit with it. Is there something you're brilliant at? Something you do better than almost anyone around you that nobody knows about because you've been waiting for the work to speak for itself? Here's what I need you to hear. Staying quiet isn't humility. It's hiding. And the people who need what you have, the Elena Medinas of the world, they can't find you if you won't step out of the back room. Nora didn't become Trent. She didn't become loud or flashy. She became more of what she already was. Careful, precise, deeply prepared. But she gave those gifts a voice. She stopped introducing herself as the trace evidence analyst. When people asked what she did, she'd say, "I find what the crime scene is trying to say when nobody's listening." Every time, the person would tilt their head and say, "What do you mean by that?" And just like that, she was invited to explain. Pollard calls this a unified message, a line that pulls you out of the commodity box and makes people curious. Matthew Pollard wrote The Introvert's Edge for every quiet person who's ever been overlooked. The ones doing the real work, wondering when someone's going to notice. His message isn't wait longer. It's build the system that makes them notice. Not by being louder, by being so prepared, so clear, so unmistakably valuable that the room rearranges itself around you. If you've been the Nora in your own story for too long, go pick up this book. Now, if this old man's story gave you something tonight, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. And if you know someone brilliant who's been letting the Trents of the world take the stage, send them this. I'll see you in the next one.